Good morning, everyone. My name is Brittany Ramsey, and I am the Region H Chair. Our region includes Ohio, Indiana, and Northern Kentucky. And today we are going through the first course of our brand new Advisor Development Training Program. This is our first course titled Becoming a Chapter Advisor. It is the first part of the blue level, and it is really directed towards our new volunteers, training them to become chapter advisors, and really just helping our already wonderful group of current volunteers pass along that knowledge that they've had and the experiences of being a chapter advisor or working with the students in our region so that we can create a better network and ongoing funnel of trained volunteers. So to dive in, there's different advisor roles that the fraternity has set up and that each of our chapters are required to build in their program. So we're going to dive into understanding what each of these roles are, whether you're already serving in one of these different roles or you are looking to become a potential advisor for one of our chapters. These are the different options that you will see. If you are brand new to being advisor, the first three are going to be one of the options that you will probably undertake. The first being a faculty or a staff advisor. These are individuals that either are employed with the university as a teacher or they work on a paid staff position, and they are responsible for keeping the chapter connected with the university. Next, we have community advisors. These are typically brothers from the fraternity, but not always, and they help the chapter keep connected with the local community and find service opportunities to help be involved with their campus community. Third, we have our scouting and youth service advisors. These individuals are committed to serving the youth in the community and also connecting the chapter to local scouting organizations. They work really closely with the service chair, and we'll talk more about this role in particular, but they help build the service program or connections for the service VP on the chapter level. And then lastly, we have advisor chairs, and the advisory chairs oversee the entire advisory committee. So all of the advisors that serve the chapter should be falling under this advisory chair for organization purposes and for communication structure with the chapters. And it helps facilitate all of the different communication that the advisors might have with the chapter and also within the section and the rest of the fraternity structure. To begin with, we'll start with faculty and staff advisors. Just curious, how many of you, by show of hands or in the chat, are already serving as a faculty or a staff advisor on a campus? Ashley, Rick, perfect. And a couple others. Okay, so we've got some current faculty and staff advisors. Their role is connecting the university and the chapter. They are really the way that we keep the chapters in good standing with the university. That's their main focus rather than focusing on the fraternity standing. It's really keeping that connection and the standing with the university on par each year. They can help the chapter identify ways to get involved on campus and support the needs of the campus. They keep the chapter informed and updated on any campus policies or procedures that might be changing. And this is probably the most important piece. They help ensure that the chapter maintains campus student org recognition each year. Every single university has different requirements. They have different forms or trainings that they make student orgs on campuses go through. And it's really important to have an advisor dedicated to paying attention to that, especially since they're employed by the university. They're going to be the most familiar with it. They have access to university systems and things like that, that a community advisor or a scouting advisor or even section staff and region staff would never be able to be aware of as far as having that close of a relationship with the university. So being able to delegate that to one of your advisors in particular, that's a really important piece, especially for advisory chairs, to just make sure that somebody is always maintaining that every year with the chapter. Next, the faculty advisors can help officers build positive relationships with the campus community, whether that's the student affairs office or campus administrators, bringing in guest speakers that work for the university, and possibly helping them recruit future or additional faculty and staff advisors. Since they work on campus, they can help the chapter book rooms, apply for university funding, complete or fill out any university paperwork, and obviously engage in activities that are happening on the campus. And then lastly, faculty advisors are really supposed to maintain connection with the executive committee as a whole. They probably talk the most often with the chapter president or anybody who's having to book events or rooms on campus, but they should maintain that relationship, working with all of the exec members as much as possible. Next, we dive into understanding what the community advisor role is. The community advisor are really versed in the needs of the community around the university, and it helps the chapter connect and serve the local community. Hopefully, the community advisor has some relationship or contacts with other local orgs in the community, or they can start doing so in this role to try and connect with maybe some nonprofits or service opportunities in the community and be able to share those with the chapter. That's really what this role was intended for. Most often I've seen, especially in our region, community advisors tend to be brothers in the fraternity. So the community advisors have also been a really neat connection to the fraternity history, understanding the section, the region, and national structure. So if you have community advisors that tend to be brothers in the fraternity, that's often a great bonus, because then you've got mentors that also understand the fraternity on its own. And sometimes you're lucky enough to get faculty and staff advisors that are brothers like Ashley and Rick, so they can help also obviously keep the ties to the fraternity going as well with the students. Next, the community advisor can help brainstorm new projects for the chapter that might seem like a good fit or meet a need locally. They can work with any of the LFS chairs or VPs to help suggest projects as they see fit. They are supposed to maintain a connection with the executive committee as a whole, and they definitely work a lot more in depth probably with the program VPs than maybe a faculty or staff advisor would. This definitely is different for every single campus and chapter that we have. So these are just general guidelines, of course. And third, we have our scouting and youth service advisors. This is something I wanted to dive into a little bit more in this first workshop, because I know a lot of our chapters struggle with filling this role. I think even in the last 10 years, we've seen chapters struggle so much because they try to find somebody that's either working in the Scouts or a volunteer with the Scouts currently, and they feel if they can't find that person, they don't know how to fill this role. And so we're going to brainstorm a couple different options for people that can serve in the scouting and youth service advisor role, and open up definitely the world of opportunity for our chapters to make sure we can still fill this and lengthen, I guess, the list of potential alumni that can serve in it. So this advisor ensures that the chapter helps maintain a commitment to serving their youth. Definitely a big part of the Spring Youth Service Day that we have every year. They can help the chapter connect with youth organizations if they don't already have something established in their program. They should have a solid grasp on community youth programs and opportunities to serve the youth near the university. Sometimes these individuals are tied to local scouting organizations or nonprofits, educational institutions. Those are all great places that a chapter can potentially recruit a new scouting and youth service advisor. I know a couple of our chapters I've seen in H4 and H6 and even H2, they have teachers in this role or somebody that works for an educational institution. And that also helps the chapter dedicate some of their service program to youth service, but it's not necessarily scouting specific. And lastly, the scouting and youth service advisor is supposed to maintain connection with the executive committee as a whole, just like our other two advisory groups, and definitely helps mentor the service VP especially. So they work more hand in hand with that program than I think anything else, just because of the dedication to youth and scouting services in their title. So my biggest tip here, especially if you are an advisory chair or you become an advisory chair one day, or you're just trying to help the chapter recruit additional advisors, to think outside the box. We get so caught up sometimes trying to find somebody that just works in the Scouts, and that's a very limited number of people. So if there are other youth service organizations or people that are connected to different youth orgs or things like the Scouts, other nonprofits, the limits are kind of limitless. And if you can help the chapter kind of navigate through that and see all the different options that they might have in their community, hopefully we won't have the struggle that we've had for the last 10 years trying to fill these roles for our chapters. And then lastly, we have our advisory chairs. This position is supposed to oversee the entire advisory committee. So all of the faculty, community, scouting and youth service advisors that serve for the chapter, this person should really be helping organize them. I will say, after the feedback we've collected over the last 2 years, this is, I think, the biggest piece that we're missing in advisor training. We have really phenomenal advisory chairs doing all of these things and helping organize the advisor structure for the chapters that they serve in. And then we have probably half of the other region where they don't have an active advisory chair, or they don't have somebody even in that role appointed, and the advisors don't have any structure with how they're supposed to help the chapter or who they're supposed to be communicating with. And they've definitely lost the connection ties to the rest of the fraternity. And I know some of our section chairs have had that experience this year. So with this training, we want to reiterate what all the different steps are for advisory chairs and be able to pass this along to students and help them explain this and appoint people into these roles or elect them into the advisory chair roles to make sure that they can help lead the advisory committee and keep all of these volunteers together, organized, and communicating to best serve the needs of the students in that chapter. So the advisory chair helps keep the connections between the entire chapter and all of the advisors. So whether it's people that work at the university or it's the community and scouting and youth service advisors who don't work or live on campus or even near campus, they need to be making sure that the connections and communications are happening between that whole group. They should also be the advisor that maintains the most communication with the section chair. Section chairs tend to talk to all of the advisors at every chapter, or they have an advisor chat or a group message or email chain. But the advisory chair should be communicating the most often with section chairs, just keeping them updated on what's happening in the chapter. If there's any concerns going on, are there any things to celebrate, great successes happening that we want to share with the rest of the section and the region? And they should really be the spokesperson for the entire advisory committee. Advisory chairs should have a good understanding of chapter history and fraternity programming, our operations, and all the resources available. They should be one of the most knowledgeable advisors on the advisory committee. And that goes part in hand because they help recruit and train future advisors, hopefully. So we want to make sure that we're not putting a brand new advisor beginning in the role into this advisory chair position when they're supposed to be helping train or keep communication and a structure built for the rest of the advisors, if that makes sense. One of the most important things for an advisory chair to do at the beginning of each semester is work with the rest of the advisors to figure out attendance for the semester. And they probably need to work with the chapter president heavily on this as well. So figuring out which advisors can attend what meetings, even if they're virtual. If the chapter has asked for an advisor to be at every chapter meeting, maybe you can split up those responsibilities between the 4 to 6 advisors that the chapter has, just so there's one every week at their chapter meetings. If they need a chapter advisor at the exec committees, who's attending those. And some of our ceremonies, like the initiation ceremony, has an advisor speaking part. So you want to make sure that those are planned out ahead at the beginning of each semester, if possible, with the president, to make sure that an advisor will be in attendance to be able to speak for that part. I've been with a few of our section chairs on visits, and we go stop in to see a ceremony, and then at the last minute they're running to grab the section chair because an advisor didn't come to the ceremony, didn't know about the ceremony, and they have to have somebody fill in the last minute to read that part because they forgot about it. So this is one of those tips that I give advisory chairs to make sure that you bring that up in conversation at the beginning of every semester. You help kind of facilitate that planning part of the ceremonies that needs to happen, and make sure that you or one of the rest of the advisors on the committee is ready for that date that hopefully gets planned pretty quickly at the beginning. The advisory chairs definitely work with the executive committee as a whole. They probably maintain the closest relationship out of all the advisors with the chapter president. They also serve as a non-voting member of the executive committee. So this is often the person that probably attends exec committee meetings more often than the rest of the advisors, depending on the expectations of the students, but that's also a part of this role as well. If there's ever turmoil or a conflict resolution moment or opportunity happening with the executive committee, the advisory chair is supposed to be that non-voting, unbiased member that can come in and help facilitate a resolution for the executive committee. And then lastly, just the paperwork side of APO. The funnest part that we have in this role is making sure that the advisory chairs are signing the charter reaffirmation forms. These are due November 15th and April 15th every year. That is their biggest piece that they have an officer portal, just to make sure that they are reaffirming the charter that's on campus and that they're conducting business as usual. And then every July 31st, the chapter has to complete an annual financial review form. So between any point of the academic year, or if you do it over the summer, the advisory chair or a designee from the advisory committee should be having a financial review with the chapter. So that's probably with the chapter president, the treasurer, and maybe another advisor or two, but conducting just a review of the budget from the last year. Where does their account stand, or their account stand, and what's the health of their chapter finances? And that form that the president or treasurer fills out every July is really just a yes or no, making sure that happened, and that all their tax forms and everything are taken care of. So this is definitely the most descriptive role of the 4 different options. The other thing I want to mention is when our chapters are having to meet requirements for advisors, they need 2 faculty or staff. They need at least 1 community advisor. They need at least 1 scouting or youth service advisor. And the advisory chair can be any of those 3 as well. So sometimes you'll see an OP, somebody's listed twice, and that makes sense. If, let's say, Ashley is an advisory chair for her chapter, she can also be a community or a faculty staff advisor as well. Okay, does anyone have any question on the 4 different types of advisors in APO? Okay. Next, we're going to dive into the basics of the advisor role. These are probably really familiar for our section chairs who are already working really regularly with our students. And if you have been serving for an advisor for at least a year, hopefully a lot of this is fresh information. But I know that our advisor training for every chapter, whether the advisory chair has been doing it or the chapter has been trying to do it, has been very minimal in some of our sections in some areas of the region. So we wanted to make sure that we went over all of these basics in our first course for advisor training to make sure everybody has that foundation of knowledge. First and foremost, this is the brand new chapter advisor handbook. The national office and the National Advisor Development Program Chair, Kim, her team just updated this summer. So if you've seen the chapter advisor handbook or orientation guide in the last 10 years, this is the same thing. It's just gotten a revamp and it has a lot more information and details in it. It also has parts where you can fill in and kind of learn as you go and take notes. So I will send this out to everybody through our section chairs, and they can forward it on to all of the advisors in their sections to make sure everyone's got a fresh copy. The tips for all of the different roles that you might face as a chapter advisor are listed here on the left. There's so many different hats that an advisor or anybody who works with the chapter might be wearing versus just advising on certain topics or giving advice when asked. Chapter advisors can also be a leadership mentor. They are probably the people that work the most often with the program chairs at the chapter level, the leadership VPs, fellowship VPs, service VPs, even the membership VPs, hopefully, and helping those students become servant leaders in their role and learn the positions and help make sure that officer transitions and trainings are happening every year. Advisors are that foundation and hopefully the stability and structure that chapters need. They don't change every year. Hopefully they give that grounding so that they can help make sure the things that need to happen every year are happening and that leadership training occurs. Advisors are also teachers, guides, role models. I always say, especially to chapter presidents, the way that you're leading a meeting or communicating with people sets the tone for the rest of the chapter. And the same thing goes for advisors. If you are super excited to be there and to meet students and work with them, and you're really positive and radiating that energy, I think that's the energy hopefully that you will most often receive and see spread out through the chapter, especially when the chapter gets into difficult times, like maybe a heated bylaw discussion or a contested election, or there's just turmoil on the exec committee or maybe chapter drama or anything like that. the chapter advisor really needs to be that role model of safety and stability and calmness in the faces of those what can sometimes be a crisis mode for our students. They're also the encourager or the cheerleader. They can be the voice of reason, probably most often than not. This is something that I'm sure long-term serving advisors have seen. There are times when if there's either something that might have to do with risk management or there's something that could be dangerous, where the advisor has to kind of step in and be that voice of reason and say, hey, this might not be allowed. Could you try A, B, or C options instead? And also serving as that kind of safety monitor for the chapter. And then lastly, and probably the most important for me as Regent Chair, is really keeping the chapter connected, help promoting things that's happening within the chapter or the campus or the community, and helping them stay tied and connected to the fraternity, especially in times like this year with the national pandemic that's happening. So keeping everybody connected and keeping that communication going is so important, even if it's virtual or even if things are just happening online this year and there's no way to connect in person. It's really important for those advisors to stay active and engaged, as difficult as it may be over a Zoom call. Next is a really brief overview of using Officer Portal. This most often just has to deal with advisory chairs, but it's important for all advisors to understand what Officer Portal is and what it might look like, because the students will probably come to you first with questions if they don't go to a section chair. So this can help limit the amount of emails that a section chair gets or anybody on region staff before those big November 15th and April 15th deadlines. If you look on the right side of the slide, those are all the different modules in Officer Portal. It gives a national calendar there, but the tabs that you would most often get questions on from students would be forms, members, or officers. The forms are all of the forms that are due each semester or over the summer. You can see completed forms. You can see forms that are still due from the chapter. And this is where your president, membership VPs, service VPs, and treasurers probably have to go the most often, just to make sure everything is completed and filled out. I will say this is the most important tab probably for section chairs when they're trying to determine the health of a chapter or what's going on or what's been completed, what hasn't been completed. This is where they are looking. So if you ever start hearing from a section chair or getting copied on emails that something's not submitted, or they have questions on something that was submitted, like maybe they answered there's no ceremony this semester, or they filled something out that said operations ceased to happen. That's where the section chairs are getting that information, and that's why you're seeing an email pretty shortly thereafter to see what's going on with the chapter. But hopefully that doesn't happen this semester or next. Next, they have the members tab. That module is the official roster. So it's where you will hear about your membership VP or secretary, making sure everybody's updated. The list of actives, associates, and graduates get reported there, as well as all of the pledge classes. The next tab is officers, and that is where all of the exec committee members that are on there are listed. I think it's 7 or 8 positions of the exec, mainly the people that have to fill out forms, and then all of the advisors should be listed there. And there is a way to add additional. So if you are one of the fortunate chapters that tends to have over 6 advisors or even 8 to 10, you can list everybody in there and give them access to the OP if necessary. So if you have 5 or 6 community advisors or extra faculty staff, the students can customize that list as long as they need it to be. And that is what they need to make sure is updated every year. I know when the national office pulls contact lists to email people, and when I do it on the region level to make sure we email something to everybody and broadcast it, that is where we're pulling that info from. So we've seen sometimes where advisors aren't getting emails and they're not even one of the ones that are listed in OP. So if you've signed on to serve as an advisor and haven't checked that with the president yet, or you haven't heard about OP or seen anything like this, you want to make sure that you're touching base with the chapter president to see that you're on there and listed as an official advisor, so that section chairs know you're there, so that the region staff knows that you're there, and that you're getting national emails that are supposed to be going out to chapter advisors. Next, you have orders. That's where chapters can order pins or place order for pledge manuals, things like that from the national office. My favorite module, and the one that I have learned the most about over the last couple years, is the dashboard. They've put a lot of great information there, and that's something great to take a screenshot of probably at the start of every year. It gives the list of the number of active members, number of associates, current pledges. It shows the chartering date on there, what the tax ID number is, and that's a really often question asked from chapter treasurers. The tax filing date for the chapter, and then you can also have a quick link to any open invoices or an open statement for the chapter. So if they're worried about finances or they haven't paid a bill recently, as an advisor, you can go in and you should be able to see that. And then lastly, the bottom two are library and reports. The reports are probably not as pertinent for advisors, but the section chairs or ourselves on region staff use it quite often. But the library is super helpful now that things are virtual. The national office has put some of those virtual resources in that module, and also all of our ceremonies are there. So if you are an advisor helping a chapter with a ceremony and they're trying to plan it virtually or practice ahead of time and they need a digital copy of what to read, all of those ritual guides are under library. There's supplements or PowerPoints to go along with them, and they have to be saved here because they can't be accessed by people that aren't brothers in the fraternity. So that's why they've been saved in Officer Portal. So if you haven't seen that yet, that's a little trick and where those are saved and located for everybody in APL. Next, my biggest tip, if a chapter president or officer is coming to you as an advisor with questions, something's going wrong with OP, before you try emailing the section chair, you can always email this email address. It's opadmin@apo.org. And usually it's Rochelle at the national office, and she is super responsive and can help you through some of the questions, like if you can't get a pledge to load for some reason, or it won't let you initiate them, or you're trying to change an advisor and something's going wrong. If you don't get a response from them, my next suggestion would definitely be point the students in the section chair's direction and have them send them an email, and they can help walk them through. But 9 times out of 10, that email address and somebody at the national office can help with some of the hiccups that I guarantee will probably happen at some point with the students using OP. It's a very antiquated system, but once you get the hang of it, there's some certain nuances to learn, and the students can get used to all of the different tips and tricks of navigating Officer Portal. Here are just a couple things to remember, some of the most common questions or things that come up with our chapters that we have to remind them. You want to make sure that you're telling your students to update the roster at the beginning of each semester. That also helps determine quorum. So if there's ever a question during an election or a chapter bylaw discussion, and you're the advisor there at the meeting, if they are wondering what their number of quorum needs to be, it should be based off this official roster. And sometimes that gets chapters into trouble because they have maybe 75 people listed on that roster, but only 50 have been showing up this whole semester. So they get to November and they're like, we're not meeting quorum. Enough people aren't coming to chapter. And that's because they never updated the roster to show that they lost 15 or 20 students at the beginning of the semester. Next, OP form deadlines can affect chapter standing. A lot of people, especially students, just think that they go into bad standing if they owe money or if there's an outstanding invoice, but you can also be affected with negative chapter standing by not having forms in or having forms in on time, which can affect your chapter of excellence and pledge program of excellence standing. So you want to make sure that especially an advisory chair, you're encouraging your chapter president and the rest of the exec team to watch those deadlines and get forms in, especially within the same semester. We never want to have outstanding forms from a previous year or the last semester, definitely. And then lastly, just keeping in line with COE and PPOE, those awards, making sure that payments can be able to be turned in within 10 days of the ceremony. My advice to chapters has always been try to collect all the fees first before you do a ceremony so that you're not pledging in anybody that then is going to drop and your chapter still owes that invoice to the national office. So that's something that you can help remind every year as an advisor and kind of keep in the back of your minds when you're talking about when to schedule ceremonies and making sure, A, they have access to their chapter bank account, the treasurer is ready to make that payment, and they know all the different steps that need to take place. And then lastly, if you have any questions, I think when I mail out the advisor guide to everybody. The handbook I just showed you, we'll keep a copy together with the same page chapter guide. It gives a bunch of different tips on OP, even how to add advisors, especially if the advisor isn't a brother, and how to do that. And probably answers a lot of the questions that you might get on a COE or PPOE form or any of the other documents that are listed on OP for chapters to fill out. So we'll make sure that everybody in the region gets both of those different guides, and those are great things to just save on your computer for whenever those questions will inevitably show up from a student. Does anyone have any questions on OP in general? Okay, perfect. And then once you go throughout this advisor training program, one of the diamond level or the last level of workshops is actually mastering OP. And especially for advisory chairs, I can't recommend that course enough because it really dives into how to use OP, all of the different nuances, and how to navigate things so that you can be an expert to best help the students who have to master that sometimes overnight and start to learn how to submit papers as soon as they're elected into a role. Here are some important dates. I always used to have a screenshot of this when I was an advisor or had it listed down in my planner and marked all those dates every year because I knew that was going to be such an important week for the students. And unfortunately, a lot of them always wait till the day before to start filling out some of the really lengthy paperwork. And so as advisor, we'd make sure like the week before we'd start nudging them and make sure they start it so that we didn't get to midnight the night it was due when they start trying to fill some of these out. November 15th and April 15th are the biggest dates of the year. I don't know why everything isn't just due those 2 days. As you can see, there's a bunch of other dates that we have to remember, but those are the 2 biggest dates. November 15th is obviously coming up. That's when the fall charter reaffirmation form is due and active memberships are due. There's a couple other forms like the National Service Week form and an annual chapter evaluation form. I will tell you that the annual chapter evaluation form is incredibly lengthy, and it's basically evaluating all the different programs of the chapter and how operations have been going. So it's another thing that they can't wait till November 15th at midnight to try and start filling out, especially as a chapter president, if they're brand new, if they just got elected a couple weeks ago for a fall election. We want to make sure that somebody is there like an advisor or the past president to help navigate that form. With the new president, there is a quick date on February 1st that unfortunately a lot of chapters miss just because they're so new to getting back on campus. They typically start either mid-January to late January, and then that February 1st deadline hits them, and a lot of them miss that grant application opportunity. So the youth service grant is up to, I think it's up to $500, and it's for a chapter to plan a potential service project dedicated to the youth in the community. And they basically put an event proposal through. They asked for a certain budget up to $500. And as long as the chapter hasn't won it in the last year or two, they can be granted that money to help add a project to their service program. And that also helps save their chapter budget for other things besides a service project. So that's something that I highly encourage everybody to fill out as an advisor. Advertising these grants and encouraging and promoting them to the students is super important because they hear the most often from you all. I know our section chairs send out a bunch of reminders about these as well. And for the last 2 grants, I think for the last year, Region H has submitted the most from students. And I love seeing that because these funds are already there and available from the national office. And our students pay their membership dues, they're paying into section and region dues. And I would love to see more students have benefits to their chapter come from all of the dues that they're paying into and from some of these scholarship opportunities as well. So if you don't know about these grants yet, or your chapter doesn't talk about them every year, we want to make sure that we're definitely advertising them as much as possible and planning ahead. If you're a youth and service chapter advisor or any of the other advisory roles, and you're helping mentor the service CP, especially if you have fall elections and they're brand new to the role before this February 1st deadline, definitely mention this to them, explain what the youth service grant is and how they can apply for it on OP, and let them know this is a way to just add an added benefit to their program to spice it up a little bit and do something the chapter probably hasn't done yet. They can also affect youth in a big way. So if you've done like a youth dance marathon or I'm trying to think of some of the other projects that they've done, but things for children's hospitals, anything like that, that maybe the chapter doesn't typically do or doesn't have the funds to do. This can help provide all the materials needed. It can help provide a location rental, food, drink rental, things like that to do something for a few hours. I know the Delta Alpha chapter years ago, they used to do a prom, quote unquote, for young students that had disabilities in the community. So it was really fun. They hosted this whole dance prom night. They had food and drinks there for the kids and parents, and they could come and dance for a few hours in a local place that they rented. So that was a unique idea, and they used that for the youth service grant every couple of years so that they could help with that funding. Next, April 15th, it's the second biggest deadline. That's the spring charter reaffirmation form and the active membership dues. On both of those dates, that's where the advisory chair has to sign off on those reaffirmation forms. So those are really important dates, like I said, to mark down in your calendars as well. May 1st, they have to fill out a Spring Youth Service Day participation form. It's just like the same thing as the National Service Week form, saying yes or no if they participated and what they did. This is the second deadline for a grant. It is the Service Innovation Grant, which is new as of the last 3 or 4 years. And this is even more open-ended. And this is the one that I've been pushing the heaviest just because it's newer and a lot of people don't know what it is. It is really just for an innovative service project. So something new or unique to the chapter. And I believe it goes up to $500 as well, if not more. And it's the same exact process as the youth service grant. So the service VP would fill out an event proposal and a budget needed, and they could apply for that money. And a lot of chapters in H got that recently this year, and that was really exciting as well. And then next, the John Mack Scholarship apps are also due on May 1st as well. So this is something that's not filled out on OP. It's actually on the national website. And these scholarship applications are open to not only current students and actives, but also graduate students. So if you are a chapter advisor in grad school, or you are a section chair or working with chapters and you are still in grad school, the John Mack Scholarship is also open to you as well. So it's not just actives. And it's basically for anybody enrolled in a university program or grad school program, and somebody that has given service or made an impact outside of APO as well. So if you do anything for the community or something outside of APO, you can apply for this scholarship. I believe it goes up to $5,000. There's a lot of different levels, and they give it out to quite a few students and graduates every year. And that's really exciting. So if that's something you haven't heard about yet, especially as an advisor, that's something that you can promote to your students, especially some of the ones that you know might be going off to grad school or who are heavily involved in their communities. And then lastly, we get to our summer deadline, the one that I know our section chairs just love because all of our students are kind of checked out for the summer and they have to chase everybody down that week to make sure that they're filling them out. This is when the Chapter of Excellence and the Pledge Program of Excellence forms are due. The CAPS forms, which is the chapter assessment and planning session, that is supposed to be taking place every year, and hopefully the advisors are incorporated into that event plan, but they are invited to attend those always, of course, and the chapter just needs to fill out a couple forms about the goals that were set and how the meeting went and what it entailed. There's another couple quick forms due for the annual service hours report. This just helps the chapter calculate or the national office calculate how many hours of service our chapters nationwide are providing. And then lastly, the financial review forms are due on this date. So that's just stating over the last year, has an advisor helped somebody on the exec team conduct that financial review to make sure the chapter is looking over its finances. I will say the biggest tip that I have with COE and PPOE is that even if your chapters think they're not going to get it, or they already have a couple things listed that automatically populated into the form, and this most often has to do with not paying either dues on time or not paying for pledges on time, and they think that they can't get the COE or PPOE award, so they just pass on filling it out. These are one of the best forms, I think, for section chairs or even advisors to look at down the line, or even on an annual basis, obviously, because it asks so many different questions about the programming of the chapter. So everything from if they're planning LFS events and what their membership program looks like, are they hosting alumni events or connecting with chapter alumni, all of these different types of questions. And it's really eye-opening sometimes when we have an issue that arises with the chapter with their membership size. Maybe they've decreased greatly over the last year, or they've stopped communicating as frequently with the section chair. And they seem to be dissipating in their chapter operations. We can go back and look at these forms and see what was happening the year prior. Did they start ceasing some of their operations early? Did they kind of fall off abruptly? Things like that. So even if your chapter doesn't feel like they're going to get an award, I always advise that chapters fill them out regardless. It not only helps us have that data saved to then go back and look and have that historical perspective, especially as advisors come and go or change, or we have new section chairs, they can come in. And I know Rick can probably help answer this, and a couple of the other section chairs that we've had come in this year, but sometimes you log on for the first time as a section chair or an advisor and you see the forms submitted or not submitted. And it's really hard to get a historical perspective on what the chapter has been through or what happened last year to cause them to drop in membership so greatly. And some of these forms can help spot those red flags ahead of time. So that might just be me, but I can't help recommending that enough to make sure that chapters are filling out forms regardless of if they think they're going to get them or not. Any questions on these dates? Okay. Working with students. So this is something that I wanted to put in, especially if it's been a while since if you haven't been an advisor recently or working with students yet, things are definitely very different than they have been in the past, especially for everybody that's serving with a chapter right now. College is really crazy time for students, especially the incoming freshmen. The end of their high school career was really shattered with what was happening with the pandemic, and then to enter their first year of college, and it is still completely different and scary and a crazy time that's really unstable for a lot of students, especially depending on what their environment is, if they're on campus or they're back at home. So being compassionate and having understanding is probably more important in 2020 than it's ever been. That I can say in the fraternity, working with our students to make sure that we're understanding all of the different environments our students could be having, what's going on at home, or what are all the extra responsibilities that they could be undergoing with everything that's happening with the pandemic, any financial stresses that are extra than or more advanced than usual. So compassion is always number one, obviously. And then as an advisor or a section chair or anybody that's a volunteer working with students, we want to make sure that we're always the ones staying positive and providing stability. We're supposed to be that foundation for the students, the safe space for them to be able to rely on. I always recommend this and can't recommend this enough, but I feel like advisors on top of everybody, because they're the ones that are working with students the most closely and the most regularly, especially when things are in person. But the advisors should really be that open and inclusive figure for the chapter. So that could mean that could be the difference between a pledge feeling welcomed in the chapter and feeling safe versus not. And so I can't recommend that enough to our advisors or potential advisors to make sure that you are that open and inclusive person for any potential new members or even the current chapter members. And you're helping welcome everybody and making them feel included, and hopefully making sure that the chapter is a safe and open and inclusive space as well for our students. You want to make sure as advisors we are communicating effectively and consistently with our students. If you are not hearing from a chapter president or they haven't touched base with you yet, the worst thing that we can do as volunteers is kind of sit around and wait to hear from the students, or complain after a year goes by that they never emailed you and that's why you didn't show up to anything. If the students aren't taking that initiative to contact you, odds are they probably don't know they need to be doing that. Maybe there was something that fell off during training, especially for chapter president transitions. So as advisors, since you are the stability force and you are the foundation for the chapter, if you aren't getting that communication set up automatically, make sure that you're reaching out, you're starting that with the students. You're there to help make sure that effective communication continues to happen semester after semester. and make sure that it's consistent. You always want to make sure we're maintaining professionalism. We're not there to be friends with the students. That's not supposed to be our social circle. We are there to be advisors and mentors and guides, and we want to make sure that we maintain that professionalism, especially before anything with risk management happens or there's a conflict resolution opportunity. We have to make sure that especially for our younger advisors or newer advisors, we want to maintain that professionalism so that you're seen as that unbiased professional advisor that they can go to. That goes hand in hand with serving as an unbiased mediator and a safe space for all of the students. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, we want to make sure that we're letting students become advisors or become leaders and grow from their mistakes. It is very easy if you have been an active brother, obviously in a chapter, and you know a lot about the fraternity, you've been a volunteer for a while, or even if you're new to volunteering, you've probably seen a lot in APO and you've seen things that work really well, you've seen things that don't work really well, and the worst thing that we can do as advisors is come into a chapter and start dictating what students should do and not letting them make mistakes and learn from them. Even if you see an event and you think it's going to bomb and you don't think they're going to get great attendance, sometimes you need to let that VP or the president or whoever is leading it have that experience and learn from it and be able to fix whatever went wrong and grow from it and learn. You can always help provide advice or answer questions when asked, but you don't want to prevent students from having that experience or really safeguarding them to the point where they're not learning anything. And that's probably the hardest thing that it takes new volunteers or advisors to learn, is that it's okay to let them kind of fall off the bike sometimes. You can't prevent everything from going wrong. And we know advisors could run perfect chapters if they wanted to because they have so much experience. You know what goes well, you could run it like the back of your hand, and you want to make sure that you're letting students sometimes fall off the bike, as much as I hate that phrase, but you want to give them that opportunity to grow from their mistakes for sure. Next, this is something that I recommend everybody have. It's the same thing that I would tell our section chairs to kind of save on their Google Drive. And this is a great suggestion for advisory chairs. If you don't already have an advisory chair Gmail, I would highly recommend setting one up. That way, if you ever have to transition out of the role, or for whatever reason you step down for a little bit, another advisory chair can come in and already have access to that Gmail. And luckily the communication is already set up and you can pass along that contact info, and the chapter is already used to having that Gmail on their email listservs. If you make community partners too, I'm just a huge proponent for staff Gmails. I think it makes everyone around you's life easier to make sure that they have that consistent communication and it's not sending it to somebody's personal or work email address that can get lost. But these are all the things that I would recommend saving in a folder on your computer or in a Google Drive if you have one for the position. A copy of the advisor handbook we talked about, a copy of this presentation or the slides, a copy of the chapter bylaws for sure. I always recommend having an updated copy of the university student handbook as well. That's the first thing that Bob London and I will look at if there's a risk management issue that comes across either one of us, and for the advisor to have a copy of that as well. That helps you understand if a university policy was broken, and that's a serious issue, obviously, with the university and with APO, or understanding if things are allowed. Obviously, a copy of the National Risk Management Policy or Pledging Standards is helpful if you ever have a question that arises with either of those. We have a region copy of the Virtual Officer Transitions and Training PowerPoint. If your chapter is not doing officer transitions, which unfortunately a lot of our chapters don't tend to do, especially in this virtual realm, that's something that you can help implement with the chapter president and help make sure it happens every year so that the officers are transitioning and sharing information and knowledge between the outgoing officers and the new officers. I also recommend having a copy of the Intro to APO manual. It's the new pledge manual that came out a couple years ago. You also want to make sure the chapters are utilizing it, but it's a great reference guide to have on your end. The same page chapter guide is helpful for OP questions that might arise. There's a couple of virtual chapter guides that have come out this year, the CAPS handbook for helping with that chapter assessment and planning meeting. And then finally, the loss of a brother guide. This is something I pray that nobody has to deal with as a chapter advisor, but it's something that's definitely a possibility at any of our chapters or within our region. And it's really helpful to have that guide on hand. We lost a brother just a couple weeks ago, and I know brothers Matt Bailey and Tommy Brennan helped build this, and it was super helpful to just open it and follow all of the steps to a T and understand what we needed to do and not really have to like think during that time, really just follow steps and get everybody through that first couple of weeks is vital. So it's always something that I recommend our advisors keep on hand just in case a student or a fellow advisor or local volunteer, anything like that is lost. Really quick on risk management, there's a course that dives way more in depth into our RM program later today. But this is just the process of ensuring that any of the chapter operations are following either local and state laws, university policies, and then obviously our fraternity policies for the health and safety of our students. That's kind of the order that things go. State and local laws obviously have top priority, and that's the first thing that anything we do with RM would look at is if whether or not a law was broken first. And then next we would look to make sure if they followed university policies or if there's something specific that they broke there. Often every single university has a completely different drug and alcohol policy or how they handle cases or things like that, or how it needs to be reported. And that's one of those reasons that having that university handbook on hand is so important, because we don't have a drug and alcohol policy per se for the fraternity and how we handle it. It really, we let it go back onto the university and we follow whatever their policies are and what we need to do. And then lastly, we look at fraternity policies. So we do have certain things listed, and if anything in the fraternity policy realm has been broken, that gets handled by Bob Linden at the national office with the team of, they have a committee for that, for spirits and standards, that falls under the VP. Any concern for risk management, or if you're not sure if it might be, but you think something might be a potential risk for the chapter, always report it to the region chair immediately. You also need to copy your section chair and make sure that they are up to date. And then what I do is if it has broken any of those things I just mentioned, if there's something that has infringed upon a policy or a law, I reach out to Bob London over the phone and then get further instructions from him. The national office completely handles the investigation with their committee or with Bob and his team. So that is out of the hands of chapter advisors, section chairs, and myself as region chairs. We have nothing to do with that process. And I reiterate that to advisors, and I wanted to include it in this first level just to make sure that's clear and understood with everybody and we're all on the same page. Sometimes we've had advisors in just the last couple of years that either lead the investigation or try to make a final decision on whether or not it was an issue or if they need to report it to the university or not, without involving a section chair, without involving the region or the national office. And we can't have that happening due to keeping our charters safe on campus. If the university finds out that a community advisor knew about something and didn't report it, we can get our chapters in trouble with the university. So we have to make sure first and foremost, we're protecting the charter and the students' health and safety. That's our top concern, and that falls above everybody in volunteer roles. So I just wanted to show this quick map and process of risk management and remind everybody it's probably everyone's least favorite topic in APO, but it's definitely important for our advisors to be aware of. Okay, moving on to best practices. Some of our best practices for advisors, this comes from the advisor handbook and things that I have gathered from local advisors across our region. You want to make sure that advisors are working behind the scenes, whether that's having one-on-one chats with students or having the development time with the exec committee and working behind the scenes. The advisor should never be leading or planning something in front of the whole chapter unless it's an event specifically for that, like if it's the advisors putting on a picnic or something like that. But if it's typical chapter operations or programming, the advisors shouldn't be leading that. They shouldn't be leading a meeting. They shouldn't be leading an election meeting. And those are things that happen sometimes just because there's a lack of training or structure for the advisor teams at those chapters. Advisors are there to provide thoughtful advice from multiple perspectives. You've seen it all, especially if you've been an advisor for a few years. You've seen different exec committees come in. You've seen what worked well, what hasn't worked well in the past. So you can give those multiple perspectives, and hopefully you've got an insight to what's happening maybe at the section level. You've seen what other chapters are doing online or things that seem to be working well in the rest of the region, and you can help bring those outside perspectives to the students. You also serve as that unbiased mediator. That is sometimes when you have a chapter that gets involved in conflict resolution opportunities, quite often, that's probably the role that you will fulfill most often, just to make sure that somebody's help facilitating those conversations for exec members or between the chapter and the exec. Advisors are supposed to be working as a team with the rest of the advisory committee. And I would say, based on the feedback from students, that's probably the thing that's not happening the most in our region. And we want to make sure that advisory committees and teams are really built to be a full team within themselves and communicating within themselves so that they can best support the students as a team. And all of the advisors, especially the advisory chairs, should be working with local section chairs. Our section chairs are the individuals that are working the next most often with students. They're looking at the whole entire section, kind of having that more global perspective on the local level versus chapter advisors that are focusing on just one chapter. And it's really important to work in tandem with them to keep up to date with what's happening on that larger level and hearing updates and news from what's going on the region level and even with the national fraternity. So you want to make sure that you don't shut off that line of communication for sure with our section chairs. And then lastly, attend and participate in the chapter events as requested by the chapter. That's one of the tips I got most often from some of our longtime serving chapter advisors, was to check with students and make sure that you're figuring out when they need you to show up ahead of time and what they expect you to be at, so that every year you know what the expectations are with the exec team. And we'll talk a little bit about that at the end of this presentation as well. Does any other current advisors have a best practice or a tip that they've learned along the way that they would like to share with the rest of the group? You can either unmute yourself or I'll read anything from the chat too. Okay, let's see. Oh, Paul gave a really great tip. Our advisor development program chair, Kim, she administrates a public Facebook group. It is called Alpha Phi Omega Chapter Advisors. And that is a really great place for networking, for asking questions, meeting other advisors, and having kind of that fellow group of advisors to reach out to online, especially in this virtual realm. So that's a really great tip. If you didn't know that already and you're a current advisor, you can search that on Facebook and join that group for sure to have that support group. And Sean's tip is to try and take time to attend a service or a fellowship event each semester, which is a phenomenal idea, because I think sometimes advisors get into that cycle of just going to ceremonies or just chapter meetings and sitting in the back of the room. And if you get to the chance to go to a service or fellowship event, it can help you bond with the chapter and meet the new members, hopefully new pledges, and help be that open, safe space for students at their events and not just a serious meeting or a ceremony. Any other tips? Okay. Moving on. These are 3 expectations from the National Fraternity for our alumni. We should all be serving as advocates for the fraternity and its vision and mission. We should serve as an advocate for the fraternity's programming and our desire for growth. And then we should always be conducting ourselves in a professional and appropriate manner for an individual with a leadership role within the fraternity. And that definitely includes all of our advisors and local volunteers. These are some areas to avoid. These were listed in the original chapter orientation handbook, and I thought this is a great list just to reiterate of things that we need to avoid, especially for our brand new advisors or people that are looking at becoming advisors. Make sure that we avoid advising a home chapter too early. I always recommend not becoming an advisor until everybody who you were an active with has graduated. That typically is about 3 to 4 years, if not longer. Just to make sure that you can be that unbiased mentor and that advisor mentor figurehead for the chapter, and not have anybody from a social circle still be in the chapter when you're trying to advise. That goes hand in hand with not using the chapter as a personal social circle. We're not there as advisors and section staff or region staff volunteers to be friends with the students. That's not appropriate during their time as actives. We're there to be mentors and guides and teachers. And we want to make sure that that separation of personal relationships happens. We want to make sure that advisors especially are not venting or complaining to chapter members. You don't go to complain about the chapter president with some of the other exec members or vice versa. That's not our role. We're there to listen and to help facilitate conflict resolution conversations. And I think that also puts you into that friendship or that personal relationship realm instead of being there to be a teacher or a guide, because you wouldn't see a school teacher doing the same thing and venting to students about another group of students. So we want to make sure that we're not in that same boat as well. We shouldn't see chapter advisors leading meetings or chapter programs. There's speaking parts, obviously, for advisors and ceremonies and things like that, but an advisor or group of advisors shouldn't be leading elections or leading ceremonies, leading events, things like that, because that very often leads to a chapter that's run by just alumni, and that totally limits the students on their student leadership opportunities that they're supposed to have with APL. Next, you want to make sure that advisors are not interfering with the bylaws discussion, or especially an election, unless absolutely necessary. If there's something like a Roberts rule was missed, or there's some type of process they're not following, you can pull the president aside and give them a couple quick tips or whatever that needs to happen. But definitely you shouldn't be interfering or placing any negative energy into a bylaw discussion or election where it's not appropriate. You want to avoid planning events instead of the students. That doesn't count anything that advisors hold, like maybe a picnic or something for the seniors or anything fun like that. This is really just meant for the actual regular chapter programming that students are supposed to be planning, like LFS. Want to avoid spreading gossip, obviously, and any inappropriate behavior with students. Only because it's happened so many times in the last 5 to 10 years, I have to reiterate that dating students or being in a personal relationship with somebody that is still an active member of the fraternity is absolutely not okay, especially in our region. That's something that I put my foot down and we try to prohibit as much as possible. You should not be in a chapter advisor role to a chapter where you are involved in a personal relationship with a student. Same thing for anybody that works at a university. That policy should still apply to volunteers as well. So that's not a fun topic to talk about either, but that's something that I wanted to make sure was on here as well, so that we're clear about that with any advisors new to the role. Next, just to briefly cover working with section and region staff. We've talked a lot about section chairs because you will probably hear from them the most often. This is the structure of APL before you get to the national level. We have chapter advisors working with the students, overseeing day-to-day operations, hopefully keeping the section chairs up to date with anything major that's happening. The section chairs and section staff are collaborating with all of the chapters, advisors, and volunteers on the local level. And they're also focused at the same time on building a sectional structure to support all of you. So they're building sectional programming events, a section staff of volunteers. They're building their own training or events that are happening on the local level to best support you then as a chapter advisor. And then likewise, myself and our region staff, we do the same thing on an even larger level for all 6 of our sections. We have a region staff creating programming or disseminating programming from the national fraternity and helping it get to the local levels and building that regional structure. So we help facilitate that communication structure and the programming and idea sharing that happens between all of the sections. This is a quick note about our culture. If you're new to Region H or haven't been a volunteer yet, you probably haven't seen this. Or if you've been serving for a while and you haven't been to a region presentation before, this is my favorite slide to go over because it's our Region H culture. It's what we've ingrained into the foundation of our new region for the last couple of years. Our motto is that Region H is home. The foundation for our brand new region was really focused on increasing brotherhood and inter-chapter relations. And thankfully, we got about 1.5 years to do that before everything shut down for COVID. And we helped increase those ties amongst Indiana, Ohio, and Northern Kentucky to help everybody feel at home. And that was a huge help last year because we had the conferences in Indiana where they have had more of a drought of chapter advisors and volunteers. So that has been the foundation of our focus. It still continues to be our focus even virtually. And hopefully in the future, next year at some point, we're able to do in-person events and conferences again to help continue building those relations. We definitely embody the motto that we are student-led and student-first in our region. We are here as volunteers, whether you were a brother as an active or you are here as a faculty or community or scouting advisor that never served as an active in APO before. That is our motto. We are here to advise the students, to help them become servant leaders, and to give back to the fraternity that we all hopefully got to benefit from when we were students. Our staff and our volunteers should aim to be innovative and solution-based. This is important this year more than ever to make sure that we're helping the students come up with solutions. We have to figure out a way for APO to survive during this time, and not only to survive, but to thrive and continue growing. And I think that was something that Evan mentioned yesterday in one of our other workshops, and I loved that phrase. So we want to make sure that we're helping the students be in that positive, innovative realm that we need them to be. We place a huge emphasis on our friendship principle. We are here to help the students become servant leaders in all of the different 4 pillars of our service program. And our volunteers, whether they're advisors or section or region staff, we are all meant to be mentors to the students and not managers. We're not here to task manage the students. We're not here to do things for them. We're here to mentor them throughout their experience and to be a guide and a safe space for our students. Here are a couple notes when working with section chairs, and luckily we have a couple on this call too, so they can add any other tips that they want in their chat as well if there's something that you do need with the advisors in your sections. Make sure you're touching base with the chairs at the beginning of each semester, especially advisory chairs. You can help review last year, discuss any goals that you might have for the chapter that you want to share with the section chair. The advisory chair should make sure the roster of advisors is up to date and the section chair knows if anything changed. They should also keep the section chair updated on any important dates, especially even in place of the chapter president. It's important for the volunteers to make sure they're sharing that info as well. The section chair should be leading a group message or an email chain or something with all the advisors in the section. So you can be looking for that or reaching out to your section chair to start one of those. You can reach out to them if you need help recruiting new advisors. We now have this new training program that potential advisor candidates can go through before they become advisors. And then make sure that you're staying up to date with any regional or national news from your section chairs. If you haven't heard anything in a while, we have something that comes out probably a couple times a month, lengthy emails, so you can make sure that you're getting forwarded those and you're reaching out to section chairs with any questions. Here are a few important APO resources. Everybody on the section and region level, the national office, Stacy and Marissa handle a lot of the things that are under Bob London, more of the operational side of the fraternity. Rochelle handles a lot of the OP questions or things for students. Bob London handles a lot of the risk management things. He is our national executive director, so it's typically what he would be involved with as far as a region or a section would go or chapter. There's a finance department of a couple different treasurers or accountants. So if you called the office to help a chapter with bills or anything like that, there would be somebody in that department to chat with. There's national chapter consultants. Ours currently her name is Maggie. So if you've seen emails come through from her, she's reaching out to advisory chairs and chapter presidents, I believe, to set up meetings or events throughout the year that are virtual, just to keep them connected with the national office and national resources. And then obviously our national president and VP, Rob Coop and Melody Martin. And then OP is obviously another important resource, more so for the advisory chair or any advisors that want to access official roster or forms that have been submitted or the document library. And we get to our last section. This is something that I wanted to remind everybody before we went, that all of this information is great, but every single chapter is completely different in how they're set up, what their chapter bylaws specify. Some chapters even have their own advisor guides or list of expectations. So no matter what you've learned here today, make sure that you take that and you go have a conversation with either the chapter president where you're currently serving, or if you're interested in becoming a chapter advisor, you reach out to those chapter presidents, you reach out to the local section chair and start learning about what their specific expectations will be. That's the most important thing to take from today's workshop, is to have conversation and talk with our students. Make sure that you are continuing that conversation every year. And sometimes, and most often than not, it has to be the advisor starting that conversation with the students. Sometimes chapter presidents don't know to do that or aren't told that during a transition, or maybe they don't feel comfortable starting that conversation from the get-go. So you want to make sure that you open that communication line, you have a safe space to have that conversation, and let the students know that it's okay to set expectations for advisors. They should be doing that, and they should be telling you all what steps they need to they need in order to best support themselves as students in the chapter. So you could set up a meeting with the exec or the chapter president and ask these questions. How often does the chapter need advisors to attend regular meetings? Which advisors should be going to the chapter bylaw discussions or election meetings? Do they want at least one at everything? Which I would recommend, just in case there's any questions that come up with parliamentary procedure. What events and ceremonies does the chapter want the advisors to attend? Like Sean said, if they could go to fellowship or service events, maybe there's a big one that happens every semester. If that's the big event and it's really special to the chapter, maybe they want the advisors to make it to those. They need to figure out ahead of time what advisor is doing the speaking part for initiation ceremonies. Next, and probably the most important, is figuring out what the communication structure is. And this is something the advisory chair should be leading with the president. How often is the advisory team communicating with exec? Who's talking with the president? Are there certain advisors maybe quote unquote assigned to different exec members? Like, for example, is the scouting and youth service advisor really just focused on mentoring the service VP? That way you prevent, if you have 6 to 8 advisors, are all of them emailing the president at the same time, or is it funneling through the advisory chair, something like that? Next, how are the advisors representing the chapter on the section level? If there's section advisor chats over Zoom, even if it's virtual, or if there are roundtables happening, even if it's just communicating with the section chair, who is responsible for that? Is it the advisory chair? Is everybody included? Figuring that out ahead of time is important. And then lastly, are there any university policies or restrictions that the advisors should be aware of and the section chair should be aware of for the chapter? We have almost 30 chapters and groups, and I think we are at 4 or 5 that are on quote unquote dry campuses, or they're on campuses where student orgs can't have alcohol at any event. And that's not a rule that APO has. That's specifically specified from the university. So understanding that as an advisor and helping be that safety net to make sure that events like that aren't happening and they're not jeopardizing their charter on campus is really important for an advisor. Does anyone have any other suggestions on questions to ask exec, or any other questions overall about the advisor role? Okay, you all have completed our first level for Blue, becoming an APO advisor. Risk management is actually later today. It's a recording from our past president, Mark Stratton. He leads a really great overview of the National Risk Management program and how that affects volunteers. These are the rest of the courses for the gold and diamond levels. Some of them will be taking place later today, so I highly recommend checking those out. There will also be recorded versions available on our website over the next couple of months. Here is my email and our Region H Advisor Development Chair. If you have any further questions, we're happy to help out. You should also reach out to your section chairs. They've got the best knowledge of what's happening on the local level, and especially with the chapters if you are not a current advisor. Thank you all for your time and your dedication to taking this first course and learning so much about the introduction to this role. And thank you for our current advisors and staff members who attended to share input and be there to support our new advisors. Have a great rest of the day. The next course starts at 1 for everybody that is planning on attending Advising Chapter Finances.